As promised, Will is back with some stories from his Civil War ancestors. Watching them all, it's up to season 10 now, I think, but I forget it. It's fun. So anyway, as promised, I am back with Will, and he, as we mentioned, if you saw the first episode, he has an ancestor, or more than one,
yes,
who was actually in the Civil War, and we discovered through a phone conversation that you have all kinds of stories, and I think it's the kind of thing that actually it helps bring something like the Civil War to life more than what you see in a textbook even.
Absolutely. The stories that they told and the letters that they wrote,
Right.
That's where I like to say where the real history is, because you get more of the intimate, more vulnerability of the soldiers and what they were thinking at the time, and their concerns, what they were proud of, and what was on their minds.
Okay. So we'll start with who your ancestors were.
Well, some of my ancestors, probably more directly, very directly, was my great-great-grandfather. And I remember very much when I was young, my grandfather, which was his grandson, told the story of how his father told him because my great-great-grandfather died in 1900, and my grandfather was born in 1902, so he never met him.
Okay.
And so we were in the living room, and my grandfather would say, "Oh yeah, my father said it was a terrible war. They were at Shiloh. They were surrounded by Confederates, and so they dropped everything and they ran, and he was shot in the back at Shiloh." And so that's, over the years, my interest in the Civil War grew. We lived in Alabama at the time, and the Battle of Shiloh was right near there.
Okay.
We went there to what we thought was because there was a Missouri he was from Missouri, and there was a Missouri regiment at Shiloh. And so when I was looking to join the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War, they were chartered by the 83rd Congress and are the legal heirs to the Grand Army of the Republic. And the Grand Army of the Republic was the veterans group for the Union soldiers. So when I was looking to join that group, my mom, who's the genealogist of the family, helped me do the research of ordering his records, his military record, and his pension record from the National Archives. And so it was interesting because we found out he was at Shiloh. He was at Shiloh, but he was at Shiloh a month after the battle.
Oh.
And he had rheumatism.
So it's like family lore instead.
Absolutely. And so, but to get into my great-great-grandfather, he was originally from Germany, and he was drafted into the German monarchic, Revolution. And so he didn't want to fight for that. And so he left Germany and went to France, and then went to St. Louis, eventually ended up in St. Louis, Missouri. And so the thing about Missouri at the time in the 1850s is that it was a staging ground for the violence that was going on in Kansas, and what they called what they called Bloody Kansas. And it was this precursor to the Civil War. These were the events that were leading up to the Civil War. And so one of the most notable slave auctions had moved into his neighborhood in St. Louis, and the Germans were very much against slavery. And because they associated the nobles with they associated the slave owners, and they called them slave barons, with the land barons, as they called them back in Germany. So they were making that connection. And one of the things that they did was that they showed up at the slave auctions, and they would heckle and yell, scream, and they would drive the price downward, so it was not profitable.
Oh.
And so they eventually chased the auctions out of the city. And so they formed in the city. They had these. They formed their own militia groups, underground militia groups, because in St. Louis was Camp Jackson. Now, Camp Jackson was a federal arsenal with all kinds of munitions, and from what I read, whoever controlled Camp Jackson controlled Missouri. So the governor of Missouri was pro-Southern, and the legislature was neutral, but the governor was very interested in gaining control of those munitions to send them south. And so he sent in 700 state militia soldiers. Now, of course, President Lincoln was very much interested in Camp Jackson as well, in protecting it, because he knew what was going on. And so he worked with a congressman to get General Nathaniel Lyon in command to muster up regiments in that area. And they were mostly German immigrants. And they would, all the commands were basically given in German. And so they formed these regiments, and then there was one of the militia groups. They formed the militia groups as well because they knew that war was about on the horizon. So they would drill. They would block out the windows at night, and then they would put 3 inches of sawdust on the floor, and they would drill. So from what I remember, the state militia troops come in, take control of Camp Jackson, but then General Nathaniel Lyons came in with these regiments, of which was the 2nd United States Reserve Corps that my great great grandfather belonged to, and they surrounded the arsenal. The state militiamen surrendered, and they were marching down through the town or the city to be paroled. The crowd was throwing stuff at the soldiers, jeering them, and then one of the German soldiers was shot and killed. And so a riot ensued. Yeah. So violence broke out. The federal troops opened fire on the crowd, and then but by trade, my great-great-grandfather was a shoemaker. We don't have any evidence that he was part of that, but that's what happened. And so, but by trade, he was a shoemaker. And after the siege of Camp Jackson, one of the officers gave his men leave, and then they came back. They were ordered to come back, and some of them did not come back. Some of them came up bloodied and beat up. And so, but anyway, there was one time in Christmas that, over December, that my great-great-grandfather went AWOL. And so typically the only punishment that he's had was that, the only punishment he served was that he had to pay the U.S. Army $18 that was the price to get him back in service. He went back home to see his wife and kids, and that's with him. Then he, I guess he left the service, and then he re-enlisted in '64 with the 41st Missouri Company G, and then pretty much he was at the siege of Corinth and at some other, small, but that was about it.
No, it's interesting hearing stories because that's something that makes you feel more connected
Absolutely.
to what's happening. Because I think that's one thing too about the way they teach history, at least my familiar what I'm familiar with in schools, is you just feel so disconnected from it. Because one of the things I remember is I grew up in Indiana, going to Indiana schools, and the only thing we ever learned about Indiana though in the Civil War is that we were on the Union side. That was it. That was it. And so even hearing stories like this from a couple states away, I'm feeling it makes you feel more connected because the stories feel more personal.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I love going through the letters, and just like with the Grand Army of the Republic and their meetings, I love going through the minutes and seeing what they had to say. But yeah, going through the letters of what the soldiers had to say, what they were, what their fears were, what they were, what their concerns were about, that sort of thing.
No, it's interesting too because it's something I probably could have asked last time, but what was like the age range usually of the soldiers?
Ooh, I would say 18. I was the youngest, and I would say about 30, around about 18 to 40, 18 to 40. I'd have to research. I know 18 was the minimum, but I'd have to research again, remind myself how old it had to be. But a lot of this, what a lot of the young men would do was that they saw the glory of going to war, to be sold to impress their lady. And so what they would do is that they would try to lie about their age and say they were 17, because if they were 17, they actually had to get permission from their parents to go off to war. And so what a lot of them would do is that they would stick the number 18 in their shoe, and when they went to the recruiter office and they said, "Are you 18, son?" And I was like, "Yes, sir. I stand on my word. I'm 18." And they pulled their number 18 out of their shoe. And
oh wow!
So
there is a story. So you have a picture though too of somebody.
Yes. And so the other person is that I've done the most research on is my first cousin, 3 times removed, Thomas Jefferson Patton. He was born in Johnson County, Indiana. And so
it's definitely an Indiana connection for everybody watching.
And so we see that very much he's with the 9th Indiana.
I'm going to bring that up closer. Okay.
Now the 9th Indiana, and they were pretty much a Western theater unit, and you can see the slouch hat that he's wearing. I think those are captain buttons because he was captain of his regiment at the beginning of the war. He has a junior officer's shell jacket because the collar is in close. The cravat is mainly for decorative. It's a prop. It's not standard issue uniform. And I'm thinking the same with the knife. And you can see a little bit of a hint of a holster. So I do believe that's a 1851 Navy Colt. And I would think I'm thinking that that's a model 1855 Springfield. I'm guessing that that's just more of a prop. Even though he has corporal stripes, he went in as the rank of captain of the 9th Indiana for the 3-month service. And then he was from LaPorte because the family, there was Davidson. 2 of the sons were Houston and Davidson. I'm directly descended from Houston.
Okay.
And Davidson was his brother. And so Davidson went straight up to LaPorte, Indiana. And Houston and his family went out to Iowa. And then of course, Autry Houston was the father. But TJ, one other notable thing about TJ is that TJ was a pallbearer at Private John Oughton's funeral. Private John Oughton was, I want to say he was killed at the Battle of Laurel Hill. He was the first Hoosier of the war that was killed in battle. And TJ was a pallbearer at his funeral in South Bend.
Okay.
And so Then we get to the 3-year service, and TJ's a first lieutenant and adjutant to the 9th Indiana. And so basically they get deployed to the night of April 6th April 6th and 7th, we have the actual Battle of Shiloh. So the night of April the 6th, Buell's Army of the Ohio, which the 9th Indiana was part of, lands at Pittsburgh Landing, and they are deployed, and then obviously they see action the next day. And so what happens is that they're in Wickerfield, and I think they all line up in Wickerfield, and I believe you have the 9th Indiana on that side. From my side, you have the 6th Kentucky, then the 41st Ohio, and then in between the 41st Ohio and 9th Indiana, you have Mendenhall's Battery. And so basically, TJ and Captain Isaac Suman right up in front, and Captain Suman was from Valparaiso, and TJ offers him a canteen and offers him a canteen, and Captain Suman smells it, it's whiskey. And so basically what Captain Suman does is he puts his hand on TJ, and with one hand on TJ's shoulder, with one hand, and with the other one he's dumping the canteen of whiskey, and he says, "The nose of the dog is over there, and the dog is over yonder." Right there and then, a solid shot shell went right through TJ, killing him instantly, and then grape shot hit Captain Suman's horse, and Captain Suman scurried into the bushes, and then Colonel Moody, when he saw that his adjutant had been killed, he started to weep. And now newspaper accounts have it that TJ said, "Tell my father I died at my post," but from what Captain Suman said, he died instantly. So all his effects were, Davidson came down from LaPorte and picked up all, took his horse and all his personal effects. They had a big celebration of life in the town of LaPorte. There was a parade. They had a coffin, but I was working with a LaPorte County historian, and because we weren't sure where TJ was actually buried, she had been searching in the Patton Cemetery, in the Patton plot, and to no avail. And then finally, he's actually buried in the Shiloh National Military Plot as grave number 1. Okay. And in 1913, Ambrose Bierce, who is a famous writer.
Yes.
Ambrose Bierce was a member of the 9th Indiana, and he was fighting along that day. And of course, you can read his readings, What I Saw at Shiloh and Owl Creek. And 1913, he was going around retracing the steps of the 9th Indiana, and he wrote in the book that I read, he was very dismayed that TJ's rank was not on his headstone. So that takes us back to Joseph Reich, and who was at Shiloh a month. Let me get to it. We'll get back to that later. But anyway, I had one more thing so we had Davidson go to the LaPorte, and then we had my branch go to Iowa. So TJ had 3 other first cousins that fought in the Civil War. They were William, James, and John. And my ancestor was Alfred. Alfred was allowed to stay at home and help work the farm because he was helping his dad work the farm, and his wife was pregnant. And but William, James, and John had to go fight. William was with the 11th Iowa, and he died of disease in May of 1862. So TJ was killed in April of 1862. William died of disease in May of 1862. Then we go to the Battle of Bentonville in North Carolina, where John was killed in battle. And then 8 days later, James died of disease. And so that's kind of the tragic story of the war, of the lives that it took. And, because, you have both William, James, John, and TJ that were all killed, or at least died, and either were killed or died. And so that takes us back to Joseph, who was at Shiloh a month later. So who knows? We don't know, but who knows that Joseph may have buried TJ.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting to see how that all pans out.
Okay, so what I'm getting is they're still not sure if he's in that grave. Is that what?
Oh, I'm very confident that he was in that. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm very confident that I'm very confident that he's buried at the Shiloh National Military Cemetery.
Okay.
And he has his rank on there, captain.
Yeah.
So
there you go. So that's just and is being related. Did you find that out later, or is that something that helped spark your interest?
It helped spark the interest, and I've always considered portraying TJ and telling that story with the with the slouch hat, getting the 1851 Navy Colt, the shell jacket, the slouch hat with the captain buttons, and so on. So I've always considered, portraying TJ and telling his story at the LaPorte County Historical Society, because the Pattons were very well-known people in that area. They owned the Patton Cemetery because that's who it was named after. The post, the GAR post in LaPorte, was named after the Pattons. There's a Patton Grove. There's a Patton Street. So yeah, and it's I know I get this a lot. It's no relation to the famous General George Patton. So, or to Jimmy Stewart's side, because I believe he had Pattons on his family side. So.
Okay. So it's been a lot of fun talking about that. I mean, again, I'm always fascinated too by like genealogy and people's history, and I know every family has the family historian. I don't think that's me here. So
yeah, I'm taking that over. I'm the genealogist heir apparent.
That's great. I mean, so like I said, so something occurred. What I'm going to do in the comments, if you have a question.
Sure.
If you have a question for Will about his relatives, or you've heard, another side of the same story, share that. And what we could do, maybe collect up the questions. Maybe we could have you back and answer some of them.
Absolutely. That would be great.
Okay. So I will see you next time, wherever, and we'll see you on the battlefield.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.